community of St. Nectarios Greek Orthodox Church. It's in a surreal manner, Ephemephtasi. We've reached it. We're at the end of Great Lent. This is the last Wednesday where we offer a pre-sanctified liturgy during Great Lent. And then from there, we have our Lenten meal and Lenten lecture. I first want to begin by thanking all of you for joining us tonight. And I want to thank our parish council and all those who donated the delicious meal tonight and who made them. Thank you. Kudos to them and to their families, for their offering tonight. So tonight, we are blessed as I define as saving the best for last to Dr. Helen Theodoropoulos. Dr. Helen Theodoropoulos, as I said, is someone very well known, not only here at our beloved community, throughout the metropolis of Chicago, throughout the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America, but actually worldwide. Dr. Helen is a true scholar in many aspects of not only theological studies. She is a professor, she teaches, she has many people who have been taught under, who have then also taken on roles of vocation and ministry to not only become teachers, but then as well men and women who have gone to other seminaries to then blossom and learn from Dr. Helen's example to teach us about our faith and to really think about it in a very not only spiritual but a theological understanding. It's a really great blessing for us to have her tonight. And Dr. Helen, as we said, for myself, I am very blessed and I'm a little biased. She is somewhat related to me very distantly. Her nephew is my Cubano. That's Father Tasso Theodoropoulos. So in case he's watching online, I gave him a kudos so I don't hear any parapona from my Cubano. He's at the community of All Saints Ahibandes in Peoria, Illinois. And so he is also someone very fond of his aunt, Dr. Helen. But it really is a great blessing that we're going to have her here tonight. And as we said, her topic for tonight will be on the understanding of the women in the Orthodox Church. And as we see her here, her title is Models of Holiness for us today. This is truly a wonderful example. We are really hearing from a world-renowned professor, theologian, and scholar. I really hope you guys give her your undivided attention. And as we did last week, where we were very interactive, ask her questions, because not very often do we have these opportunities to bring up thoughtful questions and thoughtful ideas, especially with someone to Dr. Helen's esteem. So I think, Dr. Helen, without further ado, we'd like to call you up and thank you for being with us and joining us here tonight. Let's give her a round of applause.
Wow, that was a very overwhelming introduction, and thank you so much. I'm not sure I can live up to it, but I do want, though, everyone to be able to see this. I'm not sure, Father, can you see the PowerPoint? Maybe if we were to turn it just a
Yeah, sure, I can turn it. I'll straighten it up.
Because all right, I know that the topic, Orthodox women in the church, it's a huge topic. It's ridiculous. It's so big. So obviously, Father Chris and I worked at trying to narrow it down. And in discussing various aspects, I suggested one possibility would be for us to lift up some women from the 20th century, two of whom are recognized as saints and one who is on the path to being recognized as a saint, because these women tend to be overlooked, and we can learn a great deal. We can take their work into our hearts, and we can use them as a model for our own lives, men and women. I did want to say that this talk really isn't theological in the sense we're not examining the role of women or the discussion of the kinds of ministries women can offer, but in seeing the work that these women did and what they envisioned as well for the life of women in the 20th century and the 21st going forward, the life that they envision for our daughters and our granddaughters in terms of how that will build up the church. I think we actually push into discussion of what it means for women to minister in the church. We have in our midst with these three remarkable women, women who range from the highest aristocratic status and levels of society to the most humble. We have women who are married, all three of them, but two of them ended their lives as nuns. One was divorced and then separated. We have women who are mothers, all of them were mothers. We have women who challenged the rules and expectations and stepped outside the boundaries that were placed for them to serve the Lord. And one of these women was a convert. So in many ways, they represent all of us, the women of the modern world. In many ways, they were educated, they were articulate, and indeed, they also were models of holiness. So who are these women and how can we learn from them? And how do I advance it?
It's like a touchscreen. Slide up. Just touch the screen.
Okay, touch the screen and okay.
Hold on.
It's not working. All right.
We'll get it. I don't have enough hands.
All right.
The bottom will stay. Because I was going to fall. Oh, okay, like a normal. Left and right. Yeah,
Right,
slide it.
to go.
Yeah, slide it towards you.
Okay. So we are going to take a look at three particular women. The first one will help us to learn something about learning to be steadfast through turmoil and trials, something that we all are familiar with. The struggle, the challenges. And with the second woman, that will be Saint Elizabeth, the new martyr. The second one, we'll take a look at how to witness, how to be a witness to holiness, in particular during times of crisis. And I want us to remember that the word crisis is connected to the Greek word krisis, which means judgment. Times of crisis always bring us into times of judgment. Who are you? Where is your faith? Where is your loyalty? What do you profess? To what do you witness? And we see that in particular with the second one, Saint Mother Mary, or Maria Skoptsova of Paris. And the third is a woman that has not yet been formally recognized in the Orthodox Church as a saint, but I want to remind you that in the Orthodox Church, we have actually recognition of saints kind of going from the ground up. First, it's a local recognition. People from the community, people who knew this person, begin to remember and ask for the prayers of this person for intercession, and then bring this person to the attention of the Holy Synod of the Church. And there's an examination, and at some point, there will be a formal recognition. We have, with the case of Matushka Olga of Alaska, this process already begun. And so we will see there's already icons being written of her, and a troparion, an akathis. And so we do have her sort of in the process of being recognized. So let's get to it. The first one was a princess. Okay, she is indeed the Grand Duchess, Princess Elizabeth Theodorovna of Russia. She was Princess Elizabeth of Hesse before she was Grand Duchess, and as Princess of Hesse, she was the daughter of Alice, who was the daughter of Queen Elizabeth.
Wow.
So indeed, we have an Orthodox saint who is the granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth. As we see here, she became a duchess, a Russian duchess, and at some point, a female monastic and a saint. A little bit about her. She came from a family of 7 children. She was the second daughter, and she was the eldest sister of Alexandra Theodoropoulos. Who was Alexandra Theodoropoulos? She was the last empress of Russia. Her sister married the man who became the Tsar, and the last one, and her sister was in the family that was murdered by the Bolsheviks, right? She was called Ella by her family, and she's there, actually, she's on this side over here. Okay. However, and here's a picture of her as a little baby, and then you begin to see her as a young woman. There we go. However, in the winter of 1978, diphtheria swept through the household. Her mother was killed by the disease. Her youngest daughter was killed by the disease, and the household was affected. In fact, everybody became ill except for Elizabeth herself. And so, as a way of trying to alleviate the troubles of the family, 2 of the daughters went to live with Queen Victoria. From the age of 14, she went to live with her grandmother for a good period of time. She grew up, of course, with privilege, educated in the best possible way. She learned English. She was quite fluent in English. And yet, throughout her young life, she already began to show great humility, kindness, obedience. Instilled in her from her parents and her grandparents was the idea of the great need to care for the poor, to show compassion. And yet, she was, of course, a princess. She was actually quite beautiful, and she was greatly sought after, and she had many suitors. But the one who won her heart, was Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich of Russia. And he was the 5th son of the emperor at that time of Russia, and a very serious man and intensely religious. They married, and it was at her wedding that her younger sister, Alexandra, met the nephew of this Duke, Sergei, and it was the nephew of the Duke Sergei whom she married. It was Nicholas, the future Tsar, and so that's how the 2 marriages occurred. Elizabeth and Sergei, it was a union of love. Unfortunately, it was not blessed with children. They did raise the children of one of her sisters who had passed, so she had some motherly experience, but she did not have children. She was not required to convert to the Orthodox faith, but she chose to. And in fact, her husband wept with joy. And he gave her an icon, the icon of the face of Christ, not made by hands, right? And that was with her at her death. So she treasured that. She faced great opposition, actually. Suspicion on the part of the people who were Orthodox in Russian that she was somehow not being genuine, and opposition from her family that she was betraying. So she experienced a lot of challenge to take this step. She was told that she's just being mesmerized by the glittering church, and she says, you tell me that the outer brilliance of the church charmed me, and that you are mistaken. Nothing in the outer signs attracted me. No, no. The outer signs are only to remind us of the inner things. And she said, I know it, I feel it brings me nearer to God. She chose to be Orthodox. She chose to be Orthodox. She was a woman who enjoyed the summit of prestige and wealth. I just want to really show you that she really did, okay? She covered in jewels, the finest of everything. And yet her inner character was shaped by her faith, not by the world of material wealth around her. And honestly, she needed that because she was to face multiple terrible trials and persevere through that. It shows us that we can be at the pinnacle of success. We can have everything that the world sees as desirable. And yet, that's not what gives her her strength in her time of trouble. It means nothing. It means nothing. And she came to understand that deeply. It's not where holiness resides. It's not where joy resides. It's not where blessedness resides. It's not where love resides. And it's not where God resides. Tragically, her beloved husband was assassinated by a bomb on February 18, 1905, by a social revolutionary. She heard the explosion. He was outside in his carriage. She rushed outside to find the dismembered body of her husband, which she gathered together as best she could. And then she saw the coachman of her husband severely wounded. She arranged for transportation to the hospital and visited the dying man in the hospital. And he was very concerned about her husband. He thought he had been injured. And she assured him, in fact, that he was well and safe. She wanted the man to die in peace, not to feel that he had somehow was responsible. The newly widowed Grand Duchess, in fact, visited the murderer in prison to offer her forgiveness, but especially with the hope that his heart would soften and he would repent. She wanted to see him transformed. She offered him the icon of the Theodoropoulos and a Bible and begged him to repent for his own salvation. And as she left, she said, perhaps, maybe he will. He never did. But, well, we don't know. We don't know. It's between him and God, right? With the sudden death of her husband, the life of glittering balls. Okay, I made it.
There you go.
Okay.
You're a pro at it now.
Okay. The dances, the clothes, the jewels, the politics, it all seemed quite empty. And she began to see really and truly the futility of temporary things. She turned her attention to the spiritual life. She never again ate meat, and she began to practice more intensely a life of prayer and asceticism. She began to find a new purpose to her life. Her faith was steadfast in the face of the deepest loss and sorrow, but she saw that through God's hand, through his work, her sorrow could be transformed into something beautiful and meaningful, right? And she saw what that would be is to love God and to love her neighbor. In 1910, she was tonsured a nun in order to devote her life to serving God. On the day of her tonsure, she said to her fellow nuns, I am leaving the brilliant world where I have occupied a high position, and now, together with all of you, I am entering a much greater world, the world of the poor and the afflicted. She sold all her possessions and used her money to establish a convent, a new kind of way of being a female monastic. The convent of the St. Mary and Martha. And what this was to be devoted to the service of the poor and the suffering. The bishop presented her with her veil, saying these words, "This veil will hide you from the world, and the world will be hidden from you, but it will be a witness to your good works, which will shine before God and glorify the Lord." At St. Mary and Martha House, Elizabeth envisioned a new type of monastery, along with ours. And by the way, I have to say, all three of these women had visions of a different way of being holy than what we understand as the traditional monastic path of seclusion and isolation for prayer, which has beauty and blessedness. And there is no monk who lives by themselves, of course. Their prayer goes out to the world and transforms the world and heals the world. And St. John Climacus is one of our great spiritual writers, says prayer holds the world together. So I think of our nuns and monks. They're holding the world together. So never think that they're like doing something off by themselves for themselves. It's they're holding us all in God, in communion with God. But the women I'm talking about today had this vision that there were all these needs that had to be met. And along with spending hours in prayer, and along with the liturgies and worship, and along with the life of self-denial and fasting, she and the nuns would devote themselves to the poor and the sick of the city. They fed over 300 meals a day to the hungry in the monastery kitchen. They tended the sick. They answered thousands of petitions that came to her every day. And she took care of people. She took in orphans, especially girl orphans. She established a school for their education. She also advocated for the restoration of the order of the female diaconate in the Orthodox Church. And I know you heard about deacons last week. But in case you are not aware, there are female deacons ordained to position for over 1,000 years in the Orthodox Church. It's never been formally rescinded. It just sort of fell out of use. And your own saint, Nectarios, ordained a couple of women to the position of female deacon. But I digress. All right. But I do want to point out that she did that for the purpose of understanding how that ministry reaches to the needs of the people. It's not a type of being a liturgical assistant. Okay, the deacon is the person, and I'm sure you heard this voice last week. The deacon is the person who goes out into the world, who interfaces between the church and the world, bringing the church into the world, into the church, and the church to the world. So we see that she combined intercession and action in the heart of this disordered world. But the Bolshevik Revolution upended all the work that she was doing. Indeed, with the overthrow of her brother-in-law, Tsar Nicholas, in 1917, and the communist ascent to power, Elizabeth's life was in danger from the minute that occurred. She's a member of the hated royal family. Despite pleas from her English and German relatives to flee, she stayed. She refused to leave the needy people of Moscow. They couldn't leave. She wasn't going to leave them. She knew the danger, but her path was to hear the word of God and do it, and to follow him. It was the path of the cross. It was the path of the cross. The love of God actualized in her own life. And she says, one must fix one's thoughts on the heavenly country in order to see things in their true light. Right? Our vision comes not by looking at around us, but at God's purpose and the kingdom that calls us, right? And to say, thy will be done. It was this love of God, his immense compassion for us, that she saw even in the darkness that was swallowing her world. She says, think of a storm. There are some things sublime in it, some things terrifying. Some are afraid to take shelter, some are killed by it, and some have their eyes opened to the greatness of God. Is that not a true picture of the present times? We work, we pray, we hope, and each day we feel more and more of the divine compassion. And I want you to reflect on, what does that mean to find compassion in this storm, this turmoil? It reminds me, compassion, God's love, God's overreaching love that comes to us where we are. And I think of the three youths in the fiery furnace, because she was in a fiery furnace, right, of terror. Well, I'm Greek, I have to throw things. Use my hands. So anyway, but God is there. God is there. She was finally arrested during Bright Week of 1918 and taken into custody, into being taken into exile, or along with her assistant, Sister Barbara, one of the nuns. And then on the night of July 17th, Grand Duchess, Sister Barbara, several of the members of the royal family, it was 9 people in total, were thrown live down a mine shaft, upon which grenades were thrown into the mine shaft to kill them. And we know that they did not die immediately, because it was reported by local people who heard them, that they heard the sound of singing coming from the mine shaft, from the bottom of the pit, including the hymn, O Lord, save thy people and bless thine inheritance. So son Kyrie. The last thing Elizabeth did, because the Bolsheviks had the territory, but the White Army came in very shortly afterwards. And so local people were able to recover the bodies at in the mine shaft, because the Bolsheviks were pushed out, and the White Army, who were royalists, had gained the territory again. And they found the people, and they could see that the last thing she was attempting to do was to bind the wounds of one of the fellow sufferers. Because they were able to recover the bodies, the relics of St. Barbara, we have St. Barbara, the nun that was with her, and St. Elizabeth, they were recovered, and today they are enshrined in the monastery of St. Mary Magdalene on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, which she and her husband had actually built. They had taken a tour to Jerusalem, fallen in love with the place, wanted to support it, and were active supporters, and then she was able to be interred there. She was glorified by the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia in 1981, and by the Russian Orthodox Church as a whole in 1992. And she is one of the 10 20th century martyrs on the west, above the great west door of Westminster Abbey in London. Sacrifice, obedience, patience, endurance, courage, and steadfast faith in the face of terrible trial. Mercy, forgiveness, the love, and here's a close-up. She stands between a bishop of Uganda who died under Idi Amin and Martin Luther King Jr. And she's an Orthodox saint. So she's an extraordinary person, somebody we need to know. And she came from privilege and wealth, but that had nothing to do with her holiness. And we can see for us that when terrible trials afflict us, she gave us a model of where we go for our strength, for our consolation, for our hope, for our transformation. All right, another person from the 20th century, extraordinary, all right, revolutionary, actually a revolutionary, intense, compassionate, a poet, but very demanding in ways, controversial in some ways. In some ways, a fool for Christ, because she did things that people found unexpected. This is the one that was married twice, divorced once, at one point was a revolutionary, Russian revolutionary, but then was almost executed by the revolutionaries. Let's get into her life a little bit. All right. So she was born Elizaveta Pilenko in 1891 in Riga to devout Orthodox parents. At the age of 14, her father died and her world fell apart. I find it interesting that the previous woman, Princess Elizabeth, her mother died when she was 14. So they both had this deep parental loss early in their life. And in some way it propelled them into that pursuit of something more meaningful, For her, initially, she left the church. She was mad. She was angry with God, right? And she became a revolutionary. And by the age of 17, she had married a drunk and alcoholic Bolshevik. She was going to save him. That was her grand idea, okay? But she was drawn to the understanding of Christ as the one who is humiliated and suffering and offering himself. And she was also drawn to a particular icon at a church in St. Petersburg. The icon of the Mother of God, Joy of all who sorrow, and it's embedded with coins because it's related to a miracle that happened where the church burned and the poor box that had the coins for the poor was right above where the icon was. The icon was perfect, except that the coins burned out of the box and it fell and embedded into the icon. And to bring people to the idea that our wealth is to be given to the suffering of the world, right? But anyway, she began to reinvestigate the Christian faith. And she, in fact, became the first woman to be accepted to the all-male theological academy of the Alexander Nevsky Monastery in St. Petersburg. So she was the first female student of theology in Russia. However, given a couple more years, she was divorced and a mother. So here she's a single mother, divorced by the time she was about 19, and then the Russian Revolution sweeps in and begins to uproot her life. At first, she was with the Bolsheviks, but then she was appalled by how they were behaving. And in fact, she's arrested and put on trial by the Bolsheviks as being a traitor. And the man who's her judge, and she's acquitted, becomes her second husband. So, she was resourceful. No, but he was very impressed with her. And by the way, by that time she had already published a book of poetry, and Saint Mother Maria is actually quite a theologian herself, and we have a collection of some of her writings, her essays. They are remarkable, very well worth reading, very well worth reading. But at this point, they were refugees. Oh, yeah, I have a picture of her. So she had 2 more children with her second husband, and here she is with her 3 children. The first, Guyana, by the first husband, and then Yuri, the little baby boy, and, no, excuse me, Yuri's right here, the second, and this is Natasha, Anastasia. They call her Nastia, or not Natasha. Just to say, all 3 children predeceased her. So there was sorrow ahead for Maria and for Elizabeth, much sorrow. The family were uprooted. They became refugees. So in many ways, they mirror so much of what humanity suffers today. This process of exile and refugee status and being uprooted. They traveled many different locations. They went through the country of Georgia to Constantinople, and here's actually an image of refugees from that time period in Constantinople. They went then on to Yugoslavia and to Paris. They experienced the loss not only of their property, but of their friendships, of their identity, the fullness of what it means to be abandoned and alienated and in exile. They settled in Paris along with countless other impoverished Russians. And they struggled with terrible and relentless poverty. And Lisa, Elizabetha, our saint, our mother, came to know the bitter sorrow of her watching her 5-year-old daughter die of meningitis. And here, and this is the actual drawing by Saint Mother Maria of her daughter at her bedside. She was an artist as well. We actually had some of her needlework. She did altar pieces for altar. She had sewed icons, and we do have some of those to this day. She came to understand catastrophe, of death, of war, of all the horror that can rip our lives apart, and to understand in it the opportunity to encounter God. It reminds us a little bit of Elizabeth from the previous discussion. It can be a place where people abandon God. These women did not abandon God. They went deeper to find God there. Right? These events, from her perspective, death, it shatters our complacency. It tears apart all of the things that sort of keep the illusion going that everything's just fine. And it rips that all apart so that you begin to question your priorities, what's meaningful in life. What do we organize our lives around? And that way it becomes a door to reshaping our lives, a pathway, a passage to reshaping our lives. And she says, and these are her words, "For years I did not know, in fact, I never knew the meaning of repentance. But now, at the death of her daughter, she came to say, I am aghast at my own insignificance. At Nastia's side, I feel that my soul has meandered down back alleys all my life. And now I want an authentic and a purified road. Not out of faith in life, but in order to understand and accept death." And she comes to this, which is one of her famous quotes. "No amount of thought will ever result in any greater formulation than these 3 words, love one another. So long as love is to the end and without exceptions. And then the whole of life is illumined. And otherwise, it's an abomination and a burden." but love changes us. Later, she is forced to relocate the body of her beloved child, and she recounts this as she's walking back from the cemetery as a spiritual awakening, an awakening to God's purpose for her. She says, I became aware of a new and special, broad and all-embracing motherhood. I returned from that cemetery a different person. I saw a new road before me and a new meaning in life, to be a mother for all who need maternal care, assistance, or protection. And she does turn to the Mother of God, who is the mother that Christ gave to all his brothers and sisters to care for us and intercede. She comes to see in the Mother of God the way in which we are to begin to love each and every human being, to see them as our own child. She talks about standing at the cross that each child, each human being bears, as the Mother of God stood by her son. You really have to read her works. Okay. In 1932, her vision to become a mother for all was realized as she took the monastic habit and the name Maria. But she didn't resemble in any way an Orthodox nun, and that actually brought a lot of controversy and discussion. Some of the nuns with her that entered into the monastery that she established, there was some friction, because Maria was and the bishop actually, when he gave her the tonsure, he says, you're going to be a revolutionary nun, with the monastic assignment of the desert of suffering people's hearts. And she was a revolutionary nun, because she would get up early and go through the streets and go to the bars. She was going to the bars to find the people who were drunk and in despair. She rooted through the trash cans. She never stopped. She'd go everywhere and do anything to find ways to care for the suffering and the sick. She says, again, quite famously, at the last judgment, I will not be asked whether I have satisfactorily practiced asceticism, nor how many prostrations and vows I have made before the holy table. I will be asked whether I fed the hungry, clothed the naked, visited the sick, and the prisoner in jail. That's all I will be asked. She established a home of charity and service for the outcasts. And remember, Paris at this time was filled with refugees, exiles. It was a place of great suffering. And we're talking about the 30s now, 1930s. This was her convent, the home of the open door. Ultimately, she converted an old rundown house into a sanctuary for the down and out. She fed herself with just a couple of nuns, over 100 a day there. As I said, she spent her morning hours scrounging to find food. She housed homeless women there. She herself would often sleep under the stairs because that was the only little spot left. She would give up her own bed. She'd go to the mental hospitals. She would go to the prisons and find people that she could, who were going to be released, so that they would have a home to go to. She turned no one away despite her exhaustion, and she often sat up through the night to support people in distress. But the 30s, Paris. Right. With the coming of the Nazis to Paris, Maria found herself and her close companions. By this time, her son Yuri was helping her in her work, and there was a priest, Father Dmitry Klepnin, and another man who had converted from Judaism to Orthodoxy, who were assisting her. But they were drawn into helping the most desperate and outcast of all, the persecuted Jews. and she never hesitated or wavered. She says, such terrible times are coming. The world is so exhausted from its scabs and sores. Christianity should scorch the world with the flame of Christ's love. It should go to the cross on behalf of the world. This is the measure of love. This is the limit to which the human soul should aspire. Only when one soul takes up another person's cross, his doubts, his grief, his temptations, his falls and sins, only then is it possible to speak of a proper relation to another. They smuggled food to starving families, created false documents identifying many Jews as baptized Orthodox Christians. Children and families were hidden, then spirited away to hiding places. The house of charity was overflowing with frightened and desperate people. And Mother Maria used her monastic garb to actually provide some kind of protection. Because of her monastic garb, she was allowed to tend to the 6,900 Jews who were enclosed within the Velodrome in Paris. And working with the janitors, she was able to secretly have some children, just 4, but at least 4 children, who were hidden away in trash cans. And they were sent to the south of France and survived and lived in safety. She says the example of Christ teaches us not measure in love, but the absolute and boundless giving of ourselves, determined by the laying down of our soul for our friends. Of course, these actions put them all in great danger. They refused to yield or stop, and one of her poems that she has written says, I am your message, Lord. Remember, I started by talking about witness in times of crisis. Witness in times of crisis. I am your message, your witness. Throw me like a blazing torch into the night that all may see and understand what it means to be a disciple. A disciple of the Lord. In 1943, early 1943, first the priest that was with her, then her son, and then Mother Maria were all arrested by the Gestapo. Her son and Father Dimitri were sent to the Dora concentration camp where they perished. And Mother Maria was sent to Ravensbrück. She survived for 2 years in that living death. We have accounts from people who knew her then. They attest to her gentle and hopeful spirit, which uplifted her fellow prisoners. But on Holy Saturday of 1945, shortly before the camp was freed, and we have different accounts. One that she substituted herself for a woman who was being carted off to the crematorium. Another that there was a distraught woman that she chose to accompany, to give comfort to. In any case, she perished at that point. Poet, intellectual, theologian, revolutionary, wife, mother, nun, martyr. In 2004, saint, recognized by our ecumenical patriarch with her fellow martyrs, Father Dimitri Kleppinen, her son Yuri, Yuri's over there, and the other gentleman who had converted, Ilya Fundaminsky, and they are together celebrated on July 20th. Mother Maria lived her theology. Oh, and here is a service being held at Ravensbrück camp. for those who perished there, including these four. She's the only one who perished there, but for all of the victims. Although Maria lived her theology in her life and teaching, we discover the intense focus on love, the love of neighbor, as the fullest expression and experience of divine love, as becoming the love that God is. She looked to the Mother of God as an image of how we can and should love. As I said before, to have the love that looks at every person as your own son, your own child, to see Christ in that person, to take the suffering of that person, that cross of that person, into her heart, to co-suffer with them. She talks about this, to co-suffer with them, as the Mother of God co-suffered with her son at the foot of his cross. And Mother Maria actually created an icon, she painted an icon of the Mother of God holding a cross with the Christ child. This is not Christ as an adult, but Christ as a child, not a baby, but as a child on the cross. And we have this icon is Mother Maria holding her icon. So it's an icon that depicts. We actually do have a copy of that available in the archives available. We have Mary holding Christ, and as she was told, a sword will pierce her heart as well. And the sword, of course, a sword with its hilt is a cross. So the cross of Christ pierced her heart. And Mother Maria understands that as a model of holiness for all of us. So I'm going to be very brief with the third one. All right. I got to get out. Matushka Olga Michael of Alaska. And this woman lived her life in a little village, okay, not like the others that we saw who lived on the grand stage, no world wars that she experienced, no great turmoil, but she understood deeply the suffering that people experience in ordinary life. She became a mother and a comfort to women in the area who were abused, who had suffered loss of children, who struggled. She was a midwife, but she's also a great comfort. She sewed clothes and clothed many people. This is the holiness, if you will, of the ordinary life. There are many people who regard her as holy. They invoke her prayers on their behalf. There have been healings connected with prayers to Matushka Olga. Matushka because she was the wife of a priest, but not for a very long time, actually, because, well, first of all, she grew up, she was born as a Native American, an indigenous Alaskan of the Yupik origin in Kwethluk, Alaska in 1916. She married in an arranged marriage when she was young. She lived in a three-room log house all her life in a little village, right? Great humility. For most of that time, her husband ran the post office, and she was a midwife. They had 13 children, but only 8 lived to adulthood. But she lived her life as a mama, as a matushka, as someone who cared for everyone around her. Kindness and strength showed in the way she treated her children, but then everyone in the community. She created beautiful parkas and boots and mittens for her children, but then for everyone, because anytime they saw a child who had a need, her kids' clothes were given to the children in need, and her children would see people walking around with their clothes all the time. And she said, "You can't say it." She would donate to villages beyond her own village. She made prosva prosperous of the church. She knew all the services by heart. She took care of women who were assaulted or abused. One technique that we know was she would ask them to join her in the sauna. This was part of the ritual of their particular common life, where the women would enjoy a hot sauna. And at that point, when you disrobed, you couldn't hide the injuries. And so she took it as an opportunity to offer counsel, support, help them overcome their grief and shame. She was humble, generous, hardworking, without complaint. And she's a model for how we can care for one another in our homes and in our communities. We have the Trupari into her that talks about by your fasting and prayers, you were inspired in your evangelical life. That is, she took her fasting and prayers to being the person. Evangelical is the person who bears witness, who takes the gospel out to the world. That is what motivated her to feed the hungry, you cared for the poor, you served as midwife, you brought babies into the world, you nurtured children, you clothed those in need. And then we also have the compassion. Okay, O holy and righteous Mother Olga, we have assembled today to celebrate your holy memorial and your life of prayerful love for the Lord. It was expressed in delicate care for your neighbors and for children. And one of the women who prayed for her intercession and had a vision of her healing her from her experience of rape, heard Olga tell her, God can create great beauty from complete desolation. And again, we heard that from the others. Only God can turn what is ugly and sinful, it can transform into what is beautiful and good and holy. We have to give it to him. We have to ask for him to intercede, to be present in our lives. But he does transform the sinfulness of this ugly, lost, fallen world into something beautiful. In the book of Revelation, Christ says, I make all things new. All things new. So we can find in these women a path to holiness for ourselves. Thank you.
Dr. Helen, any little Q&A? Anyone has any questions?
I have a quick question. It was St. Maria Parish that lost her child?
So, her first child, yes, her first child, Nasia, died of meningitis. Her second child that died, Guyana, was the oldest one, and I didn't tell you about her, but in the 30s, Guyana had gone back to Russia and married as a young woman, and she died there. We don't know, we think it was tuberculosis. And Mother Maria was a nun by that time in Paris and heard of her death. And then Yuri perished in the concentration camp. So.
Anyone else? Any other questions, comments? Let's give another round of applause to Dr. Helen. That was very beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Helen. We really appreciate it. Every time you come, we're always enlightened and spiritually uplifted. We just want to thank all of you again for being here tonight. Σας εύχομαι καλό βράδυ, καλή εβδομάδα, καλή συνέχεια, καλή Ανάσταση και καλό Πάσχα. Εύχομαι να σας δούμε μεθαύριο που θα φτιάξουμε τα βάγια ή του Σαββάτου του Λάζαρο ή του Κυριακή των Βαγιών. Βοηθειά σας, God bless you, have a beautiful week, and thank you for your love and for your attention. God bless you, take care.